Let's be real, in tech, clarity is pretty much everything. Whether you're writing a commit message, a bug report, or system docs, being vague just doesn't fly. So what's the tool that helps you get super precise? It's called an adjective clause, and by the end of this, you're going to be using them to write with total clarity. Okay, check this out. On the left, you've got I fixed a bug. Okay, simple enough, but your team is left thinking, which bug? There are probably dozens. But on the right, I fixed a bug that caused login failures. Boom. Instantly, everybody knows the context, they know the impact, that little bit of extra detail, that's what we're talking about. And it's all powered by this one simple tool. So how are we going to get you there? We've laid out a really clear path. First, we'll start with the core idea. Then we'll get into how to describe people and things precisely. After that, I'll show you a neat trick to make your writing sound way more natural. Then we'll dig into the mechanics, learn how to show ownership, like a user's account or a server's IP. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a quick recap and a little challenge to make sure all these new skills stick. All right, let's start with the foundation. What exactly is an adjective clause anyway? Honestly, it's super simple. An adjective clause is just a little group of words that describes a noun. That's it. But here's the most important rule, the one thing you have to remember. It always comes right after the noun it's talking about. Always. And this is where it gets really powerful in a text setting. We're not just talking about any function. It's a function that returns JSON. You're not talking about some random user. You mean the specific user who submitted the form. See how that works? This is how you go from being general to being surgically precise with your language. Okay, so these clauses usually kick off with a special little word, a pronoun. Let's take a look at how you pick the right one for the job, because it depends on what you're describing. So, when you're describing a person, an engineer, a user, a project manager, you're going to use who or that. For instance, in the engineer who designs the system is experienced, that whole clause points right back to the engineer. And you know what? In everyday tech communication, using that is totally fine and actually really common. Now for things like a tool, a file, or a server, you'll use which or that. For example, this is the tool which helps developers debug faster. And again, that is a perfect and very common alternative. So the big takeaway for your daily work is this: who for people, which for things, and that, well, that is your flexible friend for both. Okay, ready for a pro tip? If you really want your technical English to sound more fluid, more natural, like something a senior dev or a native speaker would write, this next part is absolutely key. It's all about knowing when you can leave a word out to make your sentences cleaner. So here's the secret. You can actually drop the pronoun, that, which, or who, but here's the catch. You can only do it when the noun you're describing is the object of the action in the clause. Let's break that down. In the client that we contacted, who did the contacting? We did. We is the subject. The client received the action. That makes the client the object, and that gives us the green light to drop the pronoun. And here's what you get. The client we contacted responded. See, it just sounds cleaner, more direct. It sounds so much more natural in an email or a ticket update. Let's look at another one, a real classic. The script that I wrote is perfectly correct, nothing wrong with it. But the script I wrote, it just feels faster, more efficient, right? This is one of those small changes that makes a really big difference in how your writing flows. All right, let's get into two small but, mighty details that'll make sure your adjective clauses are always grammatically perfect. We're going to talk about verbs and prepositions. The rule here is super simple. The verb inside your clause has to agree with the noun it's describing. So if you're talking about a tool that's singular, the verb gets an S. That works. But if you're talking about tools, plural, the verb doesn't get an S. That work. Simple as that. Just make a match. Okay, another key thing is what to do with little words like to, on, or with. In modern tech writing, the most natural place for them is right at the end of the clause. So you'd say, the person who I spoke to, or the library that we depend on. It's standard, it's clear, and frankly, it's how people actually talk. Okay, new scenario. What if you need to describe something by what it owns or has? For example, how do you identify a user not by what they did, but by their locked account? Or a server by its IP address? Well, there's a specific word just for that.
And that word is whose. Whose shows possession in these clauses. And what's really great about it is that it works for both people and things. You can talk about a user whose account is locked just as easily as you can talk about a server whose IP address changed. This is incredibly useful, especially when you're troubleshooting.
We are almost ready to wrap this up, but first, let's do a quick fire round and fix one of the most common mistakes I see, just to make sure your sentences are always perfectly structured. Remember that number one rule we talked about? The adjective clause has to hug the noun it's describing. It can't be separated from it. So look at this incorrect sentence. The developer was skilled, whom I met. The description, whom I met, is just stranded at the end there. It's confusing. It has to come directly after the developer to make any sense. All right, we've covered a lot of ground today. You've basically just built a powerful new toolkit for writing with precision. So let's recap the absolute essentials before we put these skills to the test. Okay, here are the absolute key takeaways. First, use who or that for people, and which or that for things. To sound more natural, go ahead and drop the pronoun when it's the object. Always make sure your verb agrees with the noun it's describing. And finally, use whose whenever you need to show possession, for both people and things. Got it? So, you've got the toolkit, you've seen the examples, you now have everything you need to transform every technical description you write from something general to something incredibly specific. The only thing left to do is actually do it. All right, here's your chance to make all this learning stick. The best way to master this stuff is to use it. So your mini challenge is to write 5 text sentences. I want you to use who 2 times, use that or which 2 times, and make sure to omit the pronoun on one of them. And finally, use whose 1 time. Go for it. Remember, you're not just learning a bit of grammar here, you're learning how to communicate with the kind of clarity and precision that really defines a great tech professional. Thanks for joining.